Hey everybody, I hope everyone's had a wonderful 2 weeks since our last queerly. I certainly have, except for being a little bit migrainey. The weather's changing and all that. Anyway, I want to start off by discussing Foucault, I guess his name is, and his arguments on a couple things, especially regarding sexual identity. Um, I talked about this in the discussion as well, but I wanted to discuss it a little bit more in detail here, at least from a personal standpoint. Um, Foucault said that sexual identity is not an innate or natural act, but a social construct shaped by history, discourse, and power. Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely, 100%. Um, I personally grew up in a straight, cishet, religious household. Um, and I feel like if I had stayed on the path of keeping with my religious studies growing up as a kid, I grew up in a Catholic Jewish household. I don't know if I would have turned out the way I am today in regards to my sexual identity. I consider myself omnisexual. And if y'all don't quite know what that means, it means I basically am attracted to everybody, but I tend to lean a little bit more towards one particular sex or one particular gender. So I feel like if I had stayed on the path of my religious studies and stuck with my environmental factors growing up in South Texas in the 90s, that, like I said, I wouldn't have turned out how I am today in regards to my sexual identity. I left behind my religious studies, completely denounced my faith, and I decided to take my own path. And I started surrounding myself with people that were going to basically affirm how I was feeling as a queer kid growing up in South Texas in the 90s. And so basically, and I guess I could say it shaped my gender as well. But also Foucault talks about that as well. And he also mentions that his framework also empowers people to see sexual identity as something that can be refined, resisted, or celebrated rather than simply imposed. So there was a lot of resistance growing up while I was forming my sexual identity. My first sexual experience was with a girl, and I was very young, and I wasn't quite sure what I was doing when I was doing this, or when I was engaging in activity, but all I know is that it felt right, but I was punished for it. It's like, why is it that it was okay for this little girl or this little boy to experience, their sexual identity without repercussions. But it wasn't okay as a child for me to express my sexual identity. Even though I wasn't necessarily quite sure what sexual identity was. I was too young. I wasn't exposed to all that. Growing up in a conservative area, we didn't have that kind of information. I had to go find it. I had to go find that information out for myself. And I didn't even know that there was a term for how I was feeling. I later stated out as later down the road, I found out that I determined that I was bisexual. But And then when I moved to California, that sexual identity grew based on where I was. I was in a much more liberal state, much more progressive. Um, and so I was able to kind of flourish within my own sexual identity when I moved to Southern California. And that's where I really came out, and felt comfortable being out to the public and to strangers. Still not great. There's still, quite a bit of issues with hate crimes and stuff like that in the area, but it wasn't as prevalent as it was in Texas. So I absolutely agree that it's a social construct, shaped by history, discourse, and power, for sure. I also wanted to touch on the TED Talk with, oh gosh, what was his name? Channing Gerard Joseph. I personally had no idea that drag was a Black queer thing. I had no idea. And I love drag. I love drag. And I feel like I should have known about this. I feel like I should have known that drag was embedded in Black queer history. So I feel like more people need to know that. I feel like more people in the LGBTQ community, including myself, need to know about these things. Because they're important. They're important. It's important for us to know where these cultural phenomenons came from. 100%. So, anyway, that's all I have to say. I apologize. Like I said, I'm a little migraine-y, so this was not the best video I could probably produce. But I think y'all got the point. So I apologize if I was rambling. Anyway, I hope y'all have a wonderful weekend. Bye.